Hello, Dental A Team listeners. This is Kiera Dent, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for being part of my Dental A Team family. I seriously love doing this podcast. I thought I was going to hate it, and I love it. I love it so much because I get to connect with you. I get to hear how this podcast is helping you and your practice be better. So if you have loved this podcast and you are willing to share, I would greatly appreciate if you'll share with your friends, if you'll leave us a review, if you'll give us 5 stars, anything you can do. Just like you guys grow your practices, we're trying to grow this podcast to positively impact the world of dental. This is how we get to grow our Dental A Team family. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the Dental A Team podcast. We're your hosts, Kiera Dent
and Dr. Mark Costas.
Mark and I had this crazy idea that maybe we could combine a dentist and a team member's perspective because let's face it, dentistry can be a challenging profession with those two perspectives. And Dental A Team podcast was created.
I'm a practicing dentist, a multiple practice owner, a dental performance coach, and the founder of the Dental Success Institute.
I've been a dental assistant, treatment coordinator, scheduler, biller, office manager, current practice owner, and international dental consultant. Mark and I don't just understand you, we are you.
Our goal is to positively impact the world of dentistry by sharing our lessons learned from the road in hundreds of dental offices.
2 perspectives, 1 mission, to help dental professionals reach their full potential. Welcome to the Dental A Team podcast. Hello, Dental A Team listeners. This is Kiera, and I am I'm driving to another office. I just finished up another quarterly meeting with an incredible team. And I decided hey, let's autopsy this practice because this is a multi-practice. They have multiple locations and you guys loved the autopsy of practices. So I'm just coming off of this one, coming in hot, thinking of a lot of these ideas while I drive to the next location. So I figured let's give you guys an autopsy. So this is a practice it's huge. They've got currently right now, I believe they've got 5 doctor ops, 6 hygiene ops. So it's an 11 operatory practice. They have 2 satellite locations. They are about to bring on their 4th satellite location, and they are about to expand their current location, their big one, to a 19 op practice. So they got a lot of pieces going on, a lot of different things. And today, when we were working through it, so the last time I did a quarterly meeting with this office, we realized that what was going on with this practice is that they were really struggling with, as you grow and you get multiple practices, you start getting distracted. So you stop focusing on your main flagship practice because all the other practices are requiring a lot of time and effort. So instead of them spending their leadership meetings every single week on the big practice and really diving into those issues, instead they were spending all their time on these smaller practices and the flagship was really getting left behind. So at the last quarterly, we decided we're going to separate out. We'll have an organizational leadership team, meaning they work on all the organizations of the practice. So paid time off, benefits packages, the parking issues, a lot of those things are organizational. So the whole business as a business, as opposed to really working on these things they're just smaller for the practice on the practice level. And so today's leadership meeting, our quarterly meeting, we focused heavily on this office. But it was interesting, one of the issues that they were struggling with is after looking at all these people who have been on this leadership team, they've been looking at the whole business as a business. So a big issue for them was, how do we actually look at the practice just keep our eyes solely on this one big practice? So that was a whole change for this leadership team. And I think a lot of times, especially multi-practice offices, as our bigger offices tend to be, we take things for granted. So working on, they already have systems in place. They usually have a good referral process. They have usually higher production. So a lot of times we spend our time focused on the smaller practices. And what we found is we really have to deliver specific time to each practice. Otherwise, the big one gets left behind. So in our meeting today, we uncovered that this office, the big office, was actually forgetting about little things. Because they have so many patients coming in, they weren't asking patients to make sure every one of them is scheduled. They've got the route slips. They're highlighting that they're due for a cleaning, but they're not actually utilizing those patients that are coming into their practice day in and day out. So that was a really big eye opener of, hey, there's some pretty low hanging fruit, even in our big flagship office. Another thing that we identified was that the bigger office they weren't working on referrals. They weren't scheduling patients sitting in their waiting room because they have so many patients coming. So like attrition, they're working on their attrition. We decided to decrease the attrition number. So increase the current patients in the office. But it was really interesting how when you have so many new patients coming in, when you have high case acceptance, we really let the small things go. And those things that made us big and great, that really would be easy to... I am driving, guys, so I apologize. But a lot of those things that made us great, we start forgetting about them and we stop using them, and we stop doing those things that made us the big practice that we became. So what I would say to you guys is, if you're a big practice, you've got multiple practices, make sure your main practice, the big practice, is not being left behind. So look to see those small things, the things that you're doing in your satellite practices. Are you doing those in your main location? Yes or no? If you're not doing those, implement 1 or 2 things this quarter. I think that's a really good time to reset, refocus, and get back on track. So that was one thing that we found that was a really, really good benefit for this practice. Another thing that we identified was as this leadership team is coming into place, they're starting to realize that they have to get co-leads. So the way we structured this practice is we decided to take all the clinical leads, so 1 lead hygienist, 1 lead assistant, and then a lead doctor. We're making sure that they are, that they're going to run all the other satellite practices. So as a result of that, what we've found is that we're needing to have co-leads, because these people that are on the leadership team that are going to be the clinical leads of all the satellite practices, so all the hygienists will fall under this one person, all the assistants will fall under another person. But that means that they leave the flagship and their time is divided at the flagship. And we don't want to do that, because then our flagship, our mothership, is being left behind. Well, that doesn't seem like a very good business model either. And so what we did is we decided we need to start building co-leads. So it's going to be the lead that's there when the main lead can't be there. And so in that, though, we realized that we've got to come up with ways for these main leaders to start to extrapolate themselves from the practice. And it's really hard. This leadership team had a hard time today because, if you guys go back and listen to the podcast called Fire Yourself, we have to be building systems to where we aren't the main one solving the problems all the time. So what we decided to do for this quarterly meeting was we decided that all the leads will start to pick 1 or 2 people on their team that they can identify right now that would be awesome at being a lead. And they're going to start grooming them for it. The assistant team is the team that's in desperate need right now of having another lead in there. And so all of the assistants applied for this position. So what we decided to do is we're going to actually rotate our assistants through and do a trial leadership week. We give them a checklist of what they're responsible for doing. So the main things like making sure end of day checklists are there, all the things, making the decisions. So that way the main lead who's gone right now has somebody that they can delegate to, and the team knows who they need to be talking to. And what's awesome about this is we're going to rotate our assistants through. Then we're going to have an anonymous survey by the leadership team, the assistant team, and then 1 or 2 other people. So we can really figure out which of the assistants truly qualifies as the leader of the group. And also, because our assistant crew is kind of struggling, this is also going to force the whole assistant team to become more accountable, become more strategic, and also become taking the initiative. Because when you have to become a leader, you're a lot more likely, like way, 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 way more likely to participate, to be more proactive if you know you're going to have a week where you're the leader. I had another office, not this office, who did what they called an assistant manager of the day. And so they would actually run a lot of the procedures in these practices every single day. And when everyone has to kind of run this leadership piece, you become a lot more understanding and aware as opposed to just kind of messing around. So we're going to try this with their assistant team over the next couple of months, figure out who the assistant lead will be. But all the other departments are going to start grooming 1 or 2 people in their department, meaning give them tasks like, hey, we need to figure out a way to order and just see who naturally will take the lead, because you want a natural born leader. You don't want to force someone into this co-leader leadership role. So all the people on the leadership team today in our quarterly meeting, their job is to find 1 or 2 people in this next quarter that they can start grooming. Also, because we're constantly looking for ways to do these jobs without depending on these leads. Like, guys, when you're a manager or you're a lead or you're on the leadership team, you think you're the only one that can do it. And that is a scary trap to be in, because you get stuck. Like, I think I'm the only consultant that can do this. And guess what? I can only go as far as I physically can go. I bottleneck myself. So what we're doing with these other offices is we're having them start to delegate things to other leads. So for this assistant crew that's doing the rotating every single week, we're also having them run the leadership meetings and have somebody else take notes. And we're going to do that for every department. So the assistant team, the hygiene team, the front office team, the doctor team, all of those teams are going to rotate who's running these meetings. We're going to get better participation in our meetings. We're going to have people more aware, and we're going to find out who our true leaders are by rotating who runs these meetings. If you've just started a leadership meeting, I probably wouldn't recommend you do this. If you've been doing leadership meetings for a while and you're looking to grow and expand, it's a great time to start utilizing that leadership team to grow the other people in the practice to take over your position. Now, there was one girl, and I loved her today. She said, Kiera, I'm actually really scared. Like, it feels a little scary to have somebody come in and replace me. That's good. It should be scary. It should feel like, what am I doing? This is crazy. But at the same time, she realized that if she doesn't do this, she's stuck and she won't ever be able to get there. Another thing with the autopsy of this practice during the quarterly meeting is that we found out, as I was listening to them, a lot of times we get stuck in a rut. We start to see things only from the perspective that we can see them in. And I think this applies to everyday life. All of us live our own lives. We live the things that we know day in and day out. And so we kind of get stuck in a zone that really just inhibits us. So for this team, what was happening was I had a hygienist. She's a hygiene lead. She's not able to get out of her practice to go see all the other locations, but she's going to be the clinical lead over every location and all the hygienists. So I said, she's like, well, it's because I see patients on Wednesdays, and that's the only day at the other locations that they are there. So I said, start looking for how you can make this possible. No, cutting out an entire day of hygiene is not feasible. But what if we cut 1 or 2 patient time? I know that sounds scary, but what's the bigger benefit? If we cut 1 or 2 hours of patient time, could you go see the other offices on Wednesday? So 1 Wednesday a month. Absolutely. That's something she could do. So I was really pushing this leadership team today in this autopsy. They're such a good practice, you guys. They're really, really, really fantastic practice, but they're getting stuck. They're getting stuck in only being able to see as far as they can see. And so by pushing the limits, asking them, challenging them ideas. And what I say to people is, when you say you can't do it, somebody else somewhere has done it. So let's find out how we can do it. Somebody somewhere has been a clinical lead and gone and expanded to go see other locations. Somebody's done it. How did they do it? Let's think outside the box. And that's where this team, I love working with them, because I come with a lot of experience, so I can give them other ideas. But guys, be idea generating machines. That is something you guys can do right here, right now, that really will enhance you. So a few other things that we pulled from the autopsy of this practice. Something else we realized, the doctor meeting was not happening on a traction style. You guys know I'm obsessed with traction, so get into traction if you're not into it. But the doctors weren't running meetings at the same level as the assistants and the hygienists and as the front office. That's really hard to have a cohesive team if our doctors, our leads of the practice, aren't doing high-level meetings as well. So they committed to doing that. A few other things as we realized, so what's happening at this flagship practice, so some of you might be doing this as well, but we're having the flagship practice be the training center for all the satellite practices. So they're actually coming into the flagship location. They're being trained. Right now they're being trained over a 3-month time period and then sent over to their other practices. Now, one thing that they're running up against is that people train at the flagship and then they don't want to go to the smaller practices. I don't blame them. The flagship is a smooth running machine. So what we're trying to do right now is we're trying to simplify the training process. And what we realized was we had a great 30, 60, 90 day. So what they built was a 3-3-3, meaning in 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, what do they need to have done? But what we found with this is that there weren't really any measurables. So we didn't have specifics. So for example, for the assistants, We didn't have any measurables or dates of when they needed to have X amount of crown preps done or X amount of root canals done. We just said they needed to do root canals. Same thing for hygiene. How many fluoride applications? What are their probe depths? How many new patient exams do they need to do through training? So we realized we needed to take every single department and actually break these down into measurable, very specific training processes with the intent that we'll be able to bring someone in and within 1 month's time, have them trained and ready to go to a new office. But we're talking fully trained. So what does that look like? So a few ideas that we came up with that we're going to work on doing is we're going to work heavily on, possibly with the assistant. So these are just some ideas that we threw out. They're going to try them out this quarter. So we're going to try where we do for like a week, that assistant is trained solely on crown preps. So they've got 4 doctors working or 3 doctors, however many doctors in your flagship, and they're going to train with all the different doctors across the board with just crown preps. So they're looking for the crown preps across the board so they really get comfortable and confident with their crown preps. Then the next week they're going to work on root canals. Then it will be implants. Then it will be, I don't know, night guards, whatever it is. And then what we do is in the last month of their training, they'll go through every single column. So they'll run a column of all the different procedures to be able to run it effectively. So that was just our initial brainstorming. They're going to put it into play. We're going to figure it out. But at the end of this quarter, they're going to have measurable, specific tasks for their training process that will really deliver at the end of the training process, somebody that can go through. We realize we need to get our training process more tight. So like a much tighter training process before we can shorten it and make it a shorter training process. Also, because this leadership team has been super involved with the organization of the whole practice, we spent a ton of time today defining the flagship's 1, 3, and 10-year goals. That's because we've been doing that for the whole organization. And this happens as you guys grow and expand because it's all kind of one organism and then it branches off and you've got little babies. And then you got to refocus and say like, okay, well, what is our flagship? Like, what are their goals in 1, 3, 10 years? Not as the whole company, this practice specifically. And then you start building around those goals. So I would say for all of you multi-practices, does your flagship have that, the 1, 3, 10-year plan for the flagship only? Do you guys have a way to build co-leads or somebody to replace you? Do you have 1 or 2 people you've got in kind of training, you don't tell them, but that they're percolating, that you're starting to give them tasks to see if they can rise up? Could you run an assistant manager in some of your departments to see which one is going to be qualified to become your lead? Could you run that? Could you do these anonymous surveys like this office is going to do? What about the idea that are you finding ways to eliminate your leadership team from the clinical level? Are you constantly looking for ways to push that envelope? And then are you guys really, really focused on making sure you spend quality time on your flagship practice? Or are we just looking as a whole business? It was such a crazy meeting today. We really, really broke this down. We found all these little pieces. There were so many little pieces when we just sunk our teeth into one practice instead of all of them at one time. When we look at all of them at one time, I feel like we get very distracted and we pull ourselves away from what we really should be focused on. So guys, that's my challenge for you guys for this. So this was the autopsy of the practice. They literally are growing like machines. They've had their best 2 months, the last 2 months. So in quarter 3, we had 2 of our highest months of this practice that they've ever had across time of being open. These leadership meetings work. They work exceptionally well, but you got to keep pushing that envelope. Keep looking for how you can do it. How can we say yes? How can we train the other practices? How can we do it better? How can we simplify this? Like, what do we need to do now to make it a more simple process? At the end of the day, complexity is the enemy of execution. How do you simplify this? So there's the autopsy of this practice. I hope you guys loved it. You multi-practice owners, where do you fit into this? Like, what could you take from today's podcast and go implement and execute it and make your practice that much better? This practice is only growing and evolving because they're super committed and dedicated to it. So what are you guys super committed and dedicated to? If you don't have this on there every day, I was listening to a Brendan Bouchard little TED Talks this morning before I went to this office, and it was saying, do you have your battle board? Meaning you've got every single month mapped out of what you're doing, what your plan is. He said, before you go into battle, you have to have a plan. And if not, you're just going to show up to battle and you're not actually going to make much progress. And that's what I feel with these quarterly meetings. Last time, their rocks, they did a good job on those rocks, like the big things, not the to-do list, just the rocks. They had those, but they didn't focus on those. So they kind of lost focus of it. So this time, they're printing them out. They're going to review them every time. And if they're not on track, they're going to give a tangible item of how to get back on track that they can report to and have as an action item for the next week. These are the things that make you guys an elite practice. These are the ways you become an A-team practice. These are the ways that you really grow and evolve as a leadership team, as a business, and as a development. But remember, in all of this, every single thing we do, we look for how we can simplify it and how we can execute today. All right, guys, there's your Dental A-Team podcast for today. I hope you guys learned a ton. As always, please share this with your friends. Give us a like. Send us a review. I seriously do read all those reviews. So please leave us a review. 5 stars. Tell your friends about us. Share. Download the podcast. Keep it up, guys, and we'll keep growing this Dental A-Team family. As always, thank you again, and I will catch you guys next time on the Dental A-Team podcast.
And that wraps it up for another episode of the Dental A-Team podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.